Hi, hello. I am Serena Saint-Sinclair, and welcome to the Pomegranate Path. Today we have a special episode, and I feel like all of my episodes I start off that way, but we are talking to Jamie Waggoner, and I'm a little bit nervous talking to her. I am personally super excited about this episode because I think Jamie is so cool. Um, So I have read Jamie's book, Hades, and I highly recommend it. It is a fascinating read. Jamie uses trance work to invoke Hades into herself and to experience through him. Each chapter opens up from Hades' perspective through Jamie in her trance work. It is such a fascinating lens that's very unique to this book. It's a fantastic mix of educational and personal and everything else in between. When I first reached out to Jamie, I really wanted to focus on her and I wanted to have a long, in depth conversation about her trance work and invocation. And actually, she did an interview with Ivy Corvus last month, I guess maybe 2 months ago when this episode is coming out. And they had a fantastic back and forth about the trance work. So instead of repeating that, I decided to kind of change the trajectory. But her trance work is fascinating, and I'm so glad that Ivy and her talked about that because I felt like Ivy was the perfect person to have that conversation with her. So I am going to link it in the caption below. Highly recommend that you check that out. And they go more in depth into Jamie's backstory than we talk about today. Also, I have free worksheets on my Patreon. The link will be in the bio if you would like to continue the work after this episode. So, without further ado, let's move into conversation. Hi, Jamie. How are you doing?
There, I'm doing well. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on your channel today.
Yes, I'm so excited to have you here. So today I'm joined by Jamie Waggoner. She is author of Hades, Myth, Magic, and Modern Devotion, and she brings a very fascinating and educational insight into Hades. I actually first met Jamie, well, I didn't really meet you. I saw you at Mystic South in 2024. I got to attend your Underworld ritual, and it was actually my first like large group ritual, and it was fascinating. I had such a good time and I learned a lot. And then this year I got to meet you in person at Mystic South in 2025. So I'm just so excited to have you here. And if you want to add a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. Yeah, so if you were at that ritual in 2024, you actually met Hades
You're
before you
right.
met me.
Yes. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, because I was holding Hades in sort of a ritual trance possession during that ritual, which was really great. It was fantastic. So, hi everyone. I'm Jamie. I write and teach from my home studio in Alabama, which is the ancestral land of the Muskogee people. And I'm an author and a witch and a teacher of magical things. I have a magic school called Way of the Weaver, and I've been doing this for just over 25 years now. So, yeah, I'm a just lover of all things occult and spooky.
Awesome. So, in the introduction, I talk about how you already had this interview with Ivy, and I'm going to be kind of calling from that. So, if anyone hasn't watched that, please go watch that first because it'll give you kind of a background of how I'm diving into some other questions. In the interview, you talk about how you had a background in philosophy, and this resurgence of goddess consciousness kind of met that path while you were in studying
Yeah.
philosophy. So I'm really curious, how has studying philosophy shaped your spiritual practice today?
Yeah. So studying philosophy, my two favorite subjects in philosophy were actually cosmology and metaphysics. So I think that that was probably, even though I didn't know it at the time, a big clue as to what I was really attracted to doing, vocationally, and where some of my talents would lie. And philosophy is great for many reasons. If you have a chance to, at your local university or community college, at least take one philosophy course, I would recommend critical thinking because there is you learn so much about how to sort of deconstruct arguments and to think about things critically. And I think that is just so key to culture, to understanding one another, to having respectful conversations. And I think that those critical thinking skills and all of the writing and sort of dissecting ideas and kind of synthesizing, putting them back together again, that I learned really helped me think through, like, okay, for example, what is this myth really saying? What happens if we kind of like take this apart a little bit piece by piece and put it back together? And I really learned those skills through my training in my philosophy degree. And with additionally with just the opportunity to have these large conversations about, for example, cosmology, which is like the belief system of how the universe operates, really sort of gave me permission to be like, yeah, these big thoughts and big topics are interesting and beautiful, and we can spend time talking about them. And again, like that critical thinking helped me get from the place of kind of the religion that I grew up in, which was very conservative, it was Southern Baptist, to sort of analyzing emergent goddess traditions and then giving myself permission to become pagan and become a witch and study magic. So it really was an important part of the path.
Yeah, I think that everyone could use some more critical thinking skills these days, me included.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. You don't really realize how important it is until like, you kind of educate yourself on it. And then you can kind of look at things that are happening in social media or on the news, and you can be like, oh, okay, well, that's actually like a straw man argument and it doesn't hold up because of this.
yeah, I think that having a basic understanding of fallacies, like you're talking about the straw man, I think is really helpful with understanding, hey, maybe why is this swaying me, or why do I feel convinced, even though that might not be what I agree with, and just kind of help you make your own ideas about things, which can be really difficult when we're constantly inundated with information all the time. So, what are some of your favorite resources for researching gods or goddesses, for really understanding symbolism and mythic roots?
Okay. Well, I'll tell you, I'll share with you what I always share with students in my classes. So what I recommend people do when they're trying to look at any sort of myth and understand a little bit more about the story, the lessons of the story, or the gods or other unseen ones that might appear. I think first, if you have the basic, like a basic skill set in trance practice, and what I mean by that is going inside meditatively and either meditating, kind of just focusing your attention on the story itself or a particular component of the story. Or in my case, when I do trance, I actually it's like an out of body experience. I go into the other world, which
Wow.
for me is this place where you can talk to non-corporeal beings, right?
Hmm.
Like the spirit of plants or the spirit of animals or all of the gods and goddesses from world mythologies. And the reason I tell people to do this first, right, like the meditative piece or the trance piece, is that it's really important that you get your own personal gnosis and your own sort of intuition about it without the influence of other like outside ideas and things like that. A big part of witchcraft is developing that inner knowing and that inner intuition and learning to listen to it.
Yeah.
And so, it's so important to go and get that for yourself first. And then the second thing you can do is kind of go to those like secondary sources, people that are writing books that are commentating on the folklore or the mythology, or going to the internet and doing the Google search and all those kinds of things. That's kind of step number two. And then step number three, I would say that's the one where you go and say, find a friend, find a buddy who will have this conversation with you, and say, hey, I found out this, I've been studying this story and I found out this interesting things about it, and then I meditated on it and I came up with this. Like, what do you think? Have you looked into this story? Well, how does this sound to you? And that's kind of a way that we can get feedback from outside sources, but we're still honoring that intuition and we're still honoring what messages that the gods might have just for us as the individual.
Yeah. Oh, that's such fantastic advice. Yeah, I feel like one of the harder parts, at least for me personally, is to learn to trust myself. When I have so much information at my fingertips, why would I figure out how I feel about something when I could find information online, and adopt that baby and or like talk to my friend if he's swayed by that. So this kind of idea of inner trust and intuition and building that within yourself first and foremost, I think is such a beautiful part of your practice and very similar practices. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that. It's such solid advice.
Welcome. I
Um,
mean, it's how again, it's how I was taught by my mentor, who is a wonderful spiritual witchy person, but also a home birth midwife and a master herbalist. And her whole approach was sort of based on that herbalist training, where when you learn to identify the properties and the elemental alignment of an herb for yourself before you look it up in a secondary or tertiary source, then you kind of become a better herbalist. Like, you don't really need to lean on that so much. It's more for confirmation than for identification. So she kind of taught us that that sort of model for spirituality too. And it is a journey learning to trust yourself, but it's so worth it in the end. And I'm so grateful for her methodology and her mentorship.
yeah, that's awesome. I love that so much. So, calling back upon, you were talking about how you were raised Christian. So, you and I were both raised Christian, and I think a lot of people in the South kind of grow up in this framework. And when we're coming from that framework, I feel like deconstruction, like a deep deconstruction, kind of comes first, somewhat, so that you can even begin to consider a path like this, especially when you come from something like Southern Baptist. I wasn't raised Southern Baptist, but kind of Southern Baptist adjacent. And what did that journey look like for you? I mean, how did you start from Southern Baptist to, invoking Hades into your body through trance work?
Yeah, it's quite a point A to point B, right?
Yes.
There's a lot in
So
between.
fascinated.
Um, yeah, so well, what's really interesting, I think we are, there's always that argument whether we're born one way or are we shaped, how much of a percentage does it go, like what's influencing, what are the major factors. I have to say, I come from a long line of people who are deeply spiritual and also take on leadership roles within their spiritual communities. So, people that were deacons, like lay preachers, deaconesses, doing all these different types of things. So, I often joke that I'm still just continuing the family business, just in a completely different
Mhm.
denomination, if you want to put it
Yeah.
that way. Um, but so spirituality was always really important and a really prevalent part of my life, even from when I was a very small child. So, and I was also one of those, I don't, a weird kid, I guess. But, as soon as I learned how to read, I started reading the Bible like for myself, right? And I didn't really often understand all of it, but I was really curious about it. And I would go and ask the pastor at our church, I would go ask him questions during his office hours. And I would
Yeah.
ask him stuff like, well, how do I know that I'm doing things right? How do I know that, that Jesus likes me? Like, what do I need to do? Do I need to go on a mission? Do I need to like raise more money? I was very like, now when I think back about it, what a strange little kid I was.
How old were
But,
you?
oh gosh, it was probably the time between when I was about, I want to say about 10 to 14 that this was really occurring,
Oh,
right?
that's so
Because then,
funny. Yeah.
yeah, like, and then when I was 14, of course, boys sort of eclipsed the church
Yeah.
life, right? So, yeah, flirting with boys far more eclipsed concerns of that sort. But yeah, and so I was always really curious about the stories, and I couldn't. There was something in me, and I know that the reason I was doing that is there was something in me that just couldn't quite connect, and I felt like I was doing everything right, and I just wasn't connecting. And, later on, that same mentor that I told you about, that taught us magic, she would say, yeah, it's kind of like trying to dial a phone and like not dialing the right number and like keeping,
Mm.
keep trying to connect and trying to connect. And until you find like what really fits you spiritually, it'll always kind of feel like you're dialing the wrong number. And that was a little bit how it felt, honestly. And college sort of gave me the freedom and the resources and opportunity to explore some of these issues without sort of my family being right there, and without like somebody kind of looking over my shoulder to see what I was checking out from the library, those types of things. So I had a little bit more freedom. And honestly, what kind of the thread that took me from Christianity into like, falling in love with the goddess and kind of wanting to explore that more for myself was really the Marys, the Marys of the New Testament. So Mary
Oh,
Magdalene,
yeah.
Mary, the mother of Jesus. Yeah, they were sort of the bridge for me. And even to this day, I still have a huge spot in my heart for both of them, in particular, Mary, the mother of Jesus, because so much of my current work deals with death and the transition between dying and the afterworld. And there's a lot of grief wrapped up in that, right? And I think Mary, the mother of Jesus, is hugely compassionate, especially for our grief and those kind of really heavy life-changing transitions that may happen. So I still, anytime I go to a new place, I'll always kind of go by the Catholic Church and visit the Mary Chapel and kind of, spend a little bit of time with her. So she's still present in my life and my practice. And it was the Marys. It was the Marys that took me through.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. Especially because I feel like if you grow up Southern Baptist, Mary is not really a super important figure. It's more of like a Catholic practice, and it's like you kind of just started working your way towards more and more. Just
Yeah,
I think that moving from Southern Baptist to Catholic in itself is honestly, maybe some people who aren't raised Christian, that in itself is kind of a big jump because I think a lot of
yeah.
Christians don't consider Catholicism appropriate sometimes,
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, the certainly my family did not consider Catholicism to be exactly okay, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's because of some of the because I mean when I look at Catholic services, I'm like they're doing high ritual magic. Like
Yeah.
they're doing very ceremonial things, right? And with the statues and the chapels and the icons and things like that, I think that that was for the Christianity that I was raised with, that was that was
Yes.
almost idolatry. Like it was outside of what was acceptable. So yeah.
Yeah, I remember my first time. I married into a Catholic family, and I remember my first time attending Mass. I was like, "Oh, we're getting on our knees." I'm like, "Oh, okay." Yeah, I just had no clue, and I was like, "Oh, this is church. I got this."
Yeah.
And I felt very behind. I was like, "This is a whole different system. I don't know who any of these saints are."
Oh my
So,
gosh, yeah. And in Catholic service, they're evoking the Holy Spirit like down into this. I mean, this is like what we do in pagan ritual, right? We evoke the presence of the
yeah,
God, of goddess.
yes, for
Like they're
sure.
doing transmutation with the bread and the wine.
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah, it like converts into the actual body and blood. I'm like,
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is pretty
They're doing
cool.
some high ceremonial magic
Yeah,
there.
this is pretty metal. Like, okay, Catholic Church, I see you.
Yeah, I know. So, and I mean, I guess coming, and I don't want to just joke about it in that way, because it is funny and like there's all that, but then
Sure.
there's also the part that people experience religious trauma in many different scenarios, and I know that some people, um, I'm lucky enough that I have a supportive community around me. I've been to therapy. I had methods and resources for working things out for myself, but I won't say that it was easy, right?
Yeah.
And I also just want to just make some space for people that did experience religious trauma because it's a very real thing for a lot of folks.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Me included. So it's and I bring up the point about deconstruction just because I think that it is a very, I mean, it's like the foundation beneath you that you built your life upon is ripped out from beneath you, and
Right.
it is like everything that you've the what you think is good and bad, what your life purpose is, what you're doing after you die, you know, all of those things are wrapped up into the basic thread work of your life. And when you go through deconstruction, having that pulled out from beneath you and going through that process is extremely painful and confusing and hard. It can be very freeing. It can also be the worst thing that you've ever been through. And I think for a lot of us, it is. So, yes, I think it's a very good point. We can joke about it, but also it can be really, really
Yeah,
horrible at the same
yeah,
time. And
yeah. It's both, you know. It's
hmm
both.
yeah.
When I first was married, it was about the same time that I also decided to become pagan and to study witchcraft. And I literally I didn't tell my family. I told my husband, and I literally broke down crying, like sobbing, and was
Oh,
telling him this. And my husband, to this day, he claims to be agnostic. I think he's slightly more of a believer than he thinks he is at
yeah.
this point, right? Because he's so witchcraft adjacent.
Yeah.
Having lived with me for 26 years. But you know, he wasn't raised with any sort of like religious sort of upbringing. So he was very confused as to why I was so upset. But he was very supportive and always has been. You know, it just, and I think that having someone, whoever that someone might be, that can be like, you know, you need to follow your heart, and who is supportive of the decisions that you make. That's just so important, you know?
For sure. I mean, I think that that will be a little bit of your guiding light, especially when I'm
Mhm.
using the analogy of like a foundation. It can feel like you're sinking. You know, like at this
Yeah.
quicksand, sort of like I'm drowning. I don't know what I believe. And if you have someone who tells you, even gives you permission to change, and that it is okay, and that no one has the answers, if someone can just give you that, I think
Mhm.
that you can take that and you can go so far with that. But sometimes
Yeah.
we need that permission to, it's okay to change, and no one knows what the right answer is. We're all just trying to figure it out. And I
Yeah.
think that we
Yeah.
forget that sometimes. So I love that your husband was that for you, because I feel
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that could honestly ruin a marriage if it was a different, circumstance. It
It
could.
could. Yeah, it could. Yeah. I feel very I'm incredibly grateful. I feel almost like I'm like, what did I do in my last life? Was I like super good? Because my husband is a wonderful human being and has really supported me every step of the way. And I think you can find that support in a lot of places, right? It could
Yeah.
be a sibling, it could be a friend, it could be a mentor, it could be, you know, anybody. But yeah, it was very, very helpful, especially with, you know, because sometimes you get yourself so worked up because, like you said, it can feel like the floor has been ripped out from under you and you're just constantly falling. And it's kind of nice to have a little reminder of like, hey, take a minute, take a breath. It's all going to be okay. And if it's not okay, we're not at the end yet.
As someone who
I
is newer to the like occult pagan sphere, I think about what it must have been like for people who were going through this before the internet. Because for me, if
Right.
I want to find a friend, I can find a friend in a couple hours online. I can find a video, I can find, a community near me. It's just a simple Google search away where I can find all these people. But for all the people in the past who didn't have as much information available to them, lived in these more like concentrated areas with less outreach. And, I feel for them because it must have been so much harder to find a friend or to just, find
Yeah.
someone to be different. It was, yeah, I think
It
that
was,
I feel lucky to have the internet sometimes.
yeah, yeah, totally, totally. Um, because of my age, I kind of bridge that gap just a little bit, right?
Hmm.
Um, so you know, when I was starting my journey with this, it would have been 1999. Okay. So, you know, before the internet, really what would happen is, you know, you would get publications. There were like magazines, right? And you would get the magazines and it would have kind of in the back, the ad section would talk about like local meetups or if there was a festival or a gathering or things like that. And if you went, that's where you could actually meet other people.
Mm.
So there was that going on. And then the other kind of big thing that happened is when the internet arrived on the scene, You may have heard of this because it's still people in people's memory. There is a site called Witchvox, okay? And Witchvox was like personal ads for witches. Basically, it had sort of a listing by state of different groups and meetups and people that were looking to just have tea or whatnot. And it was also a hub for sort of witchcraft and pagan adjacent news, a lot like the Wild Hunt is now. And it's no longer there. Like the site has been taken down. But yeah, those were some wild days back when you weren't quite sure what you were getting into. And so there was a lot of like kind of circling around, each other people, and like meeting, like having tea or stuff like that, but not really exchanging a lot of information. I think people are much more out about their practices now than they ever have been in the experience of my lifetime.
Hmm. Yeah, that's so interesting. Speaking about community, I know that you talk about this first time that you both started kind of working with Hades was at this adult pagan summer camp, it sounds like.
It was it's Vermont Witch Camp, and it's
Okay.
actually Vermont Witch Camp is not just for adults, like kids can go there too.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
yeah, yeah, they have a whole little program for kids. But it's in the reclaiming tradition, like Starhawk's tradition that she founded, and it was, yeah, the first time I started working with Hades. We started, because we talked a little bit about this journey from like Christianity through philosophy and critical thinking and deconstruction, and then kind of into this. So what happened, and I talk about this a little bit in the interview with Ivy, but I'll just keep it short. What happened for me is that I mentioned the Marys were the bridge, right? Because I was a little tired of sort of the hierarchical, patriarchal sort of vibe of Christianity, and I wanted to sort of, I didn't really have a lot of like problems with thinking about the sacred masculine, but I just had had enough of it for the time being, right? So I just kind of put it over here. I was like, guys, go hang out over there. I'm gonna go over here with the girls. I, and so for the first like, gosh, for the first, I want to say 17, 18 years, I'll have to double check my math. I just practiced with goddesses only. Like I didn't really practice with male deities. And so this opportunity for witch camp, I was on the ritual facilitation team. So that means we were in charge of planning like 6 nights of rituals to carry a story arc throughout the entire week that the camp was happening. And this particular year was Persephone's descent. And all of us who were in coordination and planning, we decided it would be an interesting thing for all of us to pick a character or a stakeholder in the story and really intensely study them and sort of bring that what we learn and our intuitions back to the group to help with the ritual planning, and to also sort of carry that energy forward when we got to camp. And I kind of waited. I mean, I was just kind of waiting to see what people would pick. This was a while ago, and I expected kind of from, my very feminine presentation and my age at the time, I was like, they're probably going to want me to do Persephone. And I was kind of thinking that way. But at the end of the day, really, really wonderful non-binary fae friend of mine was like, I want to be Persephone. And all of us were like, yes, this is amazing. We're gonna do like gender bending in this story. It's gonna be so fun.
Hell yeah.
And yeah, and at the very end, nobody had picked Hades. Like nobody raised their hand and was like, I'll take on the king of the underworld. And like two things kind of like crossed my mind, okay? And this was a very pivotal point in time, because now fast forward to 2025 and I'm like the Hades lady, but back then I was not. And two things happened. The first immediate thought that I had in my heart was, oh, poor Hades. It's like not being picked for kickball, He's like the last kid. And he's just kind of hanging around like, I guess nobody wants me on their team. I felt so bad for him. That was really my very first instinct. And then my second instinct was, well, I tend to gravitate toward more chthonic, earthy, weighty type of energies, and had done like a significant amount of work with some pretty weighty goddess energies like Caradwyn and Kalima and the Kaliak. And so that type of energy didn't, I had worked with it before and I felt comfortable with it enough that it didn't really intimidate me. So that was kind of my second. I was like, well, it kind of vibes with me personally, so why not?
Yeah.
And that was kind of the beginning. That was that really small moment in time was the beginning of me and Hades.
That camp sounds so cool, and I want to find something like that to participate in because I just feel like this concentrated area of getting to just do that. Like I said, Mystic South was my first large ritual, so I've never been
Yeah.
in a lot of community settings like that. So I personally am really looking for that. So I'm like, that sounds amazing. I would love to be a part of that one day. But the what kind of came up in my head, we talking about Hades being chosen last. I'm thinking about how Zeus got like, Olympia and then Poseidon got the oceans and they're like, Hades, you get the underworld. I feel like he's kind
Yeah,
of
he
used
he
to
drew the
being,
shortest straw. Yeah, he
yeah.
was like, yeah.
I think
So
I'm sure he's like, I'm used to this at this point. Poor
yeah, I'm
guy.
sure he wasn't surprised. He's like, I am not surprised by this at all. And like, in fact, if we look at ancient Greek and even ancient Roman culture, because, the Romans sort of absorbed a lot of the Greek gods and mythology, and Hades is Pluto basically in Roman mythology. But it was a kind of apotropaic magic, so protective magic to not say his name, right? Right?
Yes,
It's
yeah,
so people would call him the wealthy one or the unseen one or other things because they didn't really want to attract his notice. It was kind of a
right.
superstition of the time. So I feel like Hades is like, yeah, this is kind of, the story of my eternity here.
Yeah,
This
here we
is
go.
kind of this is like what's happening. But getting to know him, he he has like so much more depth of character and is just, I know it sounds really odd for me to say this because he does have moments where he has to be very tough and like really hold a line. But outside of those moments, as far as he is definitely an incredibly like masculine force, but he's also very gentle at the same time. So he doesn't have that sort of power over vibe happening that you get with some of the male gods in mythology. So he's a really interesting character, and I think just from my personal relationship with him, and this is my gnosis, this is not mythology or canon. I think he was probably upset about getting the underworld as his share in the beginning,
Yeah.
but I think as time passed and I think he became more accustomed to it and then realized that the realm of the dead is actually quite the gift to have, for a lot of reasons. And I think that he sort of got to, much like us talking about like how we grow into our spirituality, I think he sort of grew into his role and just really learned how to inhabit that and came to really love it.
Earlier in the Pomegranate Path, I made an episode talking about the anima and the animus and how we can see the arc within Persephone and within Hades. Hades kind of starting off in this very like hyper masculine, like taking abducting Persephone and then learning to be this sort of better partner. And actually, Persephone starting off as this sort of like victim like innocent and then her coming into sovereignty and becoming queen. And we can kind of see from myth that Persephone actually makes a lot of the decisions and she actually steps into this like sovereignty, this sort of, and I find that they, from my personal understanding, they kind of grow together and take on different attributes of each other of what anima and the animus. And I feel like that kind of is calling back to what you're thinking. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really think about them personally in terms
Hmm.
of Jungian psychology with the anima
Okay.
and the animus.
Hmm.
Because I think for me, like over time, my concept of gender is has become such a spectrum these days that it's hard for me to think of them in polarities at this point in
Sure.
my life.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think we're seeing again, like it's funny because it ties into our earlier conversation because we are talking about having supportive people around us. I think it really shows how the dynamic of investing yourself and your time in a relationship that may not be perfect but has room for growth and challenge can be really rewarding in the end, as long as the people in the relationship take ownership over what they've done, both the good things and the mistakes they've made, that they try to make reparations and repairs where needed, and that they don't compete. They let each other shine and let the skills really come through. And I think that Hades and Persephone are a really good example of that. With Persephone, I feel, again, this is my gnosis, I feel like when she realized that she didn't have a choice to not to be the queen of the underworld, it was kind of done. That was the point where she really got that permission to own it, to just be it, to become it, right? Like nobody was standing in her way. And that was a whole side of her that wasn't really given permission to be out when she was topside, right? When she was Kore, when she was with her mother. At least kind of that's the feeling that I get, or at least until that point in time when the kidnapping occurred, right? Like I think probably afterward, I feel like she's much more sovereign even in the upper world, after she makes the transition from Kore to Persephone. But going to the underworld was kind of a gateway for that to happen, right? And I think it was also a gateway for Hades too, because, I feel like he had been doing his job alone. And then to have another person, another component be there, to not have to take the weight of, because this is a very weighty job, to not have to take all of that on yourself, but to have an equal companion that is doing it with you is another gateway, right? It's another thing that we pass through. And knowing them now in my relationship with them, I love Persephone. She is way scarier than Hades. She's way more intense. I'm not saying that she's not loving or anything like that. Like, that's not what I'm saying. Like, she's just way more intense and way more intimidating than he is. And I think that's wonderful. I'm like, she's like fiercely femme and
Yes.
in this role, and I love it. And Hades is just like, yeah, that's my wife.
Yeah. I love that.
Proud of her, which is really cool. When I was trying to decide, because it was a big decision for me to, after my Hades camp experience, it was a big decision because I had worked with him so deeply for a few months at that point leading up. And coming back, I was trying to decide what he looked like in my life moving forward. And, there was a point when I was trying to tell him no, like, go away, leave me alone. And when that happened, he backed off, like he kind of faded away. But she kept coming. Persephone kept coming and was like, I really have to tell you, I think you're making the wrong decision. And I'm not gonna beg you, but I'm gonna like really, kind of lay it on thick here. You need to be working with Hades. Like this is really important for both of you that you do this. And I was like, okay, he's enlisting his wife now for the double team. And, in the end, of course, I ended up working with him. And not only that, but I ended up dedicating myself to him as a priestess and writing a book about him.
Yeah.
And I go into a lot of this in the introduction of Hades. So you kind of get a fuller version of the story. But I love their relationship, like the way that it's developed. And I've talked to a lot of Persephone devotees and priestesses, priests, and they all say, like, yeah, there was probably a period when things were rocky. but in the end, like it kept, in the end, they have such a curious magic. And I get asked about Persephone a lot, of course, right? Because mythology is not always pretty. There
Yeah.
are some pretty epic, like morally ambiguous, if not wrong, things that happen. And I think that we shouldn't bypass those parts of the story. And so I do get asked about Persephone because Hades definitely abducted her and potentially assaulted her, right? And and I always tell people, like, look, you've got to, it can be really tempting to lean into feminist revisionist kind of versions of the story where it's like, oh, she chose it, she has agency, all of those things, which I think are great. I enjoy those quite a bit. But I also think that we need to honor the fact that what happened in the myth is something that still happens in modern society. And getting back to that piece of why I think they are so magical is that we still can't decide whether this was a tragedy or a love story. And it's like millennia later, and we're still talking about it. There's a major Tony Award winning musical about it.
Yeah.
You know, there's like massive amounts of Hades and Persephone, like fantasy fiction out there. Romance writers love writing about them. So there's still like really a huge part of our consciousness. And it's so, like, to me, it's so magical that we are left wondering and questioning and still talking about it and having those really important, really deeply human conversations about how we treat each other and what's okay and what's not okay, and how important consent is. And like, I'm getting chills talking about it, and I'll stop because I feel like I'm getting on a soapbox, but I think that is a key piece of their particular magic.
Yeah, I feel like you did a fantastic job addressing that in your book. And I was very curious to see how you're going to approach it because I have seen all different types of interpretations of like you said, like this idea that she chose and like nothing bad happened to Hades is the worst and anything and everything in between. And I feel like for me and how I see the myth is both of them can be true and what can you learn from both of them,
Right.
and I think the point of myth is to use it to make sense in your life and to make sense of the world around you, and that might mean looking at the myth over time through different lenses and learning what you can from it. And I love the way in your book that you address it in a very head-on kind of way, but also um not being one or the other, just saying, hey, this is reality and let's have that conversation because it's an important conversation. It's not something
Yeah.
to be bypassed, but it's also not the only thing in this story. So I think you did a fantastic job of that.
Thank you. That's actually chapter 3 of the book. It's called Kliminos, which is one of Hades' epithets, one of his poetic nicknames. The one that's used most often in the mysteries of Persephone and Demeter, but Kliminos means notorious. So Hades, the notorious, the kidnapper. And actually, that was the part of the book that I was the most nervous to write. Because it
Really,
was
yeah.
so important to me to get it right, and I look forward in the future, hopefully, fingers crossed, there'll be more editions of, like, second editions that come out, and maybe I'll have even more to say then, right? Because I have been having all these conversations since the book was published in early 2024. But yeah, that I was so nervous. I was so nervous. But honestly, they came through for me in the way that they always come through for me. And if your viewers haven't read Hades, it each chapter starts out with a narrative. And the narrative is a first person retelling from Hades' perspective of what he thinks of, like, the particular myth or topic that's covered in that chapter. And they, when they were retelling me the story of Persephone's kidnapping, um Hades came he really came through and said, no, I made a mistake. Like he really did. And then there was later on in the telling of it when he knew he made a mistake and tried to do a do-over and do it right the second time. And 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 then the response of Persephone, and I don't want to spoil it if you haven't read it because it's a beautiful response. What she says to him at the end is so ambiguous, like it leaves us completely wondering, okay, so what is she actually choosing? Is she saying yes or no? And those narrative portions came from my trance practice. So when I write books, I go into a trance journey. I'll go and talk to the particular being that I'm looking to write about, and I'll be like, okay, tell me what needs to be what we need to write down. Tell me the story. Tell me, for this particular time and place, what do I need to include? And I mean, it's how I do a lot of my magic rituals and all kinds of things. But so I do the trance journey and I come out and I'm like furiously, quickly writing down every single little detail that I possibly can. And what Persephone says at the end of it is just so iconic. There is no way that I could have made that up myself. And so I have to give them so much credit for helping me through that chapter that I was really scared about.
Um, I love this idea of the ambiguity of it only because it kind of calls back to what we were talking about earlier, this sort of like trust yourself to make your own decisions. And I think that ambiguity allows us to do that. But when someone gives you a hard text and said, this is how it is, this is the only way, anything outside of this is wrong and hurtful almost, but allowing people to be like, oh, what do you think? Ask yourself, sit with that and allow that to maybe change over time if you want it to too. I think is a really beautiful way to build self-trust and to build in that intuition and really how do you feel about it? Don't just, like you were talking about earlier, how do you feel about it first and foremost? And then we can further educate ourselves, get others' opinions, and then create this whole idea around it. But how do you feel? And that the ambiguousness
Ambiguous.
of
It's,
it.
it's hard.
Yes. Yeah.
Ambiguity. Yeah, it's a tricky
Ambiguity, that's
word.
it.
Yeah, like that word in apotropaic, I always stumble over.
Okay. But that really does allow us to make our own decisions. So I love how that ties in. Um, so I do want to ask you a little bit. I was on your website and I saw that you're a death doula. Is that correct? How has
Yeah.
how did you do that after you started working with Hades? Can you tell me more about that and how has that deepened your practice?
Okay, I would love to. So if you're not familiar with that term, it's basically so my education in this particular uh, method of service was from INELDA, which is the International End of Life Doula Association, which is the certification you saw on my site. I don't often use the term doula. It has a little bit of controversy to it.
Oh,
So
okay.
sometimes I'll tell people that I'm a death midwife or that I'm a holistic death care guide. I kind of like, I'm still playing around with terminology, although doula is far more common, but it does have some sort of ancient roots in like the term was used for like slavery. So
Oh, okay. I
so
did not
it's
know
it's a
that.
little bit of a gray area, and I don't I don't like look down upon people who are using it because it's a very common term here in our modern society. But for myself, I'm still working that out. Just
Sure.
wanted to make that clear
Yeah,
of
thanks for the
what that is.
education.
But yeah, but basically, if you think about it, it's the same as like a birth midwife, right? You're helping someone be born into the world. So a death midwife is helping someone transition out of the world, out of the consensus reality of our waking world. Um, and that can look, that can be a person, it can be a pet, an animal, beloved animal friend. It can also be on a different scale, like a really large scale, because we're experiencing a lot of things right now. We're experiencing a lot of cultural dissonance, especially here in Northern America. We're experiencing climate collapse and loss of critical ecosystems, lots of things like that. All of those things, like we don't think about them because they seem so big and existential, but they really do impact us. Like death is all around us all the time and we don't realize it. So standing kind of in the threshold of that transition, it's really honestly it's more just kind of holding space and like witnessing and inviting conversation to sort of organically ebb and flow, and to just kind of be that rock in a storm that's going on. I mean, that's really kind of the craft of it. And it's actually how it's informed my practice. So one of the things I started doing after I started working with these was volunteering for hospice. And also, there were a couple different times when I was present for the transition of either a loved one that was someone related to myself or someone that was related to a friend of mine. And I was like, I'm kind of good at this. And it's a not everybody's comfortable like being in the room with death, like so present, right? And kind of keeping that steady groundedness. And but I'm like, oh, I'm good at this. So, I volunteered for hospice, learned a little bit more about it, and then I wanted to see, because my training is done through a secular organization. It's not affiliated with any sort of spiritual entity at all. I wanted to see kind of like what the modern commentary, modern training was all about. And that's why I did the training with Anelda. And I'm really glad I did. It was really great. And I highly recommend it to anyone who is interested in this type of work, or who, just wants to kind of like confront their own mortality, maybe, or if they're dealing with the loss of someone very close to them and they need some tools to do that. It's really good for all of those things. So, that kind of grew naturally out of working with Hades, because it resonates with the same energy of the underworld. And now I'm writing a book about it.
Oh, are you?
my
Wow.
my yeah, my current project, the manuscript I'm working on right now, which is again going to be published with Llewellyn, is tentatively titled One Foot in the Underworld. And so it takes, like, it's a standalone book from Hades, but it's not, it kind of takes more of the other beings of the underworld, and it kind of, goes into their stories a little bit more, some of the landscapes, some of the bodies of water. It kind of goes a little bit deep. It gets deeper in the detail of the underworld than Hades, who that the book Hades mostly focuses on Hades the god. So there's a chapter with Persephone in
Okay.
One Foot in the Underworld. Yeah, so it's kind of a continuation of the work, and it talks a lot more about, again, like this magic of what happens between living and dying, what happens in that liminal threshold place. How do we help each other have more sort of emotional and spiritual intelligence in dealing with death, so that we don't, continue to have this sort of collective trauma that we have around it these days. So yeah, I would say it's very influential in my practice. And I and stop me if I'm going on too long. I started like kind of running up against the concept of death as a very young person. And again, this is me being a weird kid. I had insomnia from the time I was 5 until about I was 19 or so. And it was really kind of born out of anxiety and night terrors and things like that. And I hardly ever slept. And one of the things that drove that was the fear that I would go to sleep and die in my sleep, and that God would not accept me into heaven. And it was like this huge fear that I had. And, when you're a child, you don't have the emotional sort of acuity to sort that out, you know, to kind of like figure out what's going on with that and dissect it. And
Of course.
yeah, and I just didn't really have resources to deal with that. So I feel like I've been walking with death for a very long time, I guess is
Mm.
my point. And all of these things are tied, they're all tied together. They're all tied together. And uh people ask me sometimes, they're like, well, isn't it depressing to do this? And I'm like, not really, not really. I don't see death as a finality. I see death as a transition between two states of being. I see it as something that's natural, that occurs all the time, something that in most cases is not the emergency that we make out of it. Um, yeah, and so it all ties together in the end. And I'm really glad that I did the doula training, because not only did I like learn what people were saying and what was in, currently in the conversation about it, but I also met like 50 amazingly compassionate humans who
Yeah.
wanted to get training to help people die. And like again, that gives me shivers. I'm like, that's I love the fact that we can take care of each other in that way, because I think we're meant to as a community.
Yeah, I'm so fascinated in the training, and hopefully one day I can do it myself. And I think that that is a very special place to focus on. And I find this conversation about death coming up more and more these days, and we can kind of see the different I see the popularity of people working with death deities, and this, I think the idea of it being depressing is a big reflection of how that specific person who's calling it depressing sees death and the finality that
Mhm.
comes with it and the loss that comes with it, which is the loss is not something to negate. Obviously, it's incredibly important, but I think that it is a much bigger spectrum of all of the things that come with it. So, this is not unscripted, and if you don't want to answer this, you don't have to. What do you think happens to us after we die?
I get asked that a lot too. It's okay. Well, first of all, like, um, I don't know specifically. I don't, I'm also a human who's embodied and wearing this like skeleton with a meat suit, just like just like everybody else, right? Like I don't actually know. Um, I'd like to think personally, I think that there's something essential that's part of you. I don't, whether it's the soul, whatever you want to call it. I think there's an essence to you, to each of us, each individual. And I think that that does continue after the physical body dies. And I think that the afterlife that we all experience, the afterlife that we kind of expect to, right? I think if you believe in a heaven, you go to heaven. If you believe, like I do, in the underworld, you might end up in the underworld, right? If you are kind of agnostic, maybe death is just a place of relaxation and merger with something larger than yourself. But I do believe in that, and I do believe, like the ancient Greeks, in the transmigration of the soul. So we're born, we die, we're born again, we die again. And in ancient Greek belief, it was actually the case that you were dead more often than you were alive. So you spent a lot more time in the underworld than on Earth. And I hope, I keep telling Hades, I'm like, okay, this time, like, let me remember, okay? Like, let me have a big old drink from the pool of Mnemosyne, the pool of
Yes,
memory,
yeah.
so that when I'm born again, I can remember this because this has been quite the ride. I don't want to forget. Um, but yeah, I do think that there is something essential that does go on. And I think that after kind of cycles of coming through physical existence and maybe other types of existence that we don't even know about, right? Perhaps it does like merge back into the universe or the universal consciousness, whatever that might look like. But I'm not really, I don't see death as something to be scared of. And even if that doesn't happen, right? Even if I don't get to go to the halls of Hades and sit down and have dinner with Hades and Persephone, which I totally hope happens, right? Um, Even if my body is returned to the earth, it's still living, right? It's still not living. It's still like a legacy. You're still part of life. You're decomposing. Bugs, worms, things will eat you. Your flesh will eventually decompose into soil, and that soil will grow plants, and either the plants will be harvested or animals will eat them or some kind of thing. But you will go on. And that's not such a bad thing either. I don't think I'm really upset by that version either?
When you say the drink from the pool of memory, I wonder if you already have. I wonder if like the insomnia from a child to like
Mhm.
your whole story arc, I wonder if that is like your body remembering or maybe not consciously remembering, but maybe your subconscious you are remembering and that's coming back up for you. So yeah, thank you so
You're the
much.
first person that has suggested that. And I'm like,
Really?
maybe.
Yeah, I
I'm
mean,
gonna have to explore that now. Okay, yeah,
let
we're gonna explore that. Thank you so much. I love it.
yeah, let me know what you come up with because I'm very curious. To me, it makes a lot of sense into that correlation. So, um, uh, my last question for you is, what are you currently blooming into? What works are you coming up? I heard you talk about your book, which sounds
Yeah.
fantastic. I can't wait to get my hands on it.
Yeah, so I'm working on One Foot in the Underworld, hopefully wrapping up that manuscript by the end of the year. So you might see it sometime in 2026, come out on the market, and or maybe early 2027. I don't know. We'll see how quickly it comes together. Because after I turn it in, there's like a process that it goes through. Um, I have, if you're interested in some of the other beings that live in the underworld, in particular Hades' daughters, like not a lot of people know that he has daughters. Melinoe, the goddess of ghosts, nightmares, and spirits and madness. I have an article about her in Llewellyn's 2026 Magical Almanac.
Cool.
So if you're interested in kind of the goddess of ghosts and working with her and learning a bit more about her, you can check that out. Uh, Also, I have two projects going on with Llewellyn now. The other one is I'm working on an Underworld tarot. So based on the Rider-Waite-Smith traditional tarot deck, but it's all the underworld of Greek mythology. So that's coming along too.
Cool.
So there's your underworld trio of tools for working with Hades. And the other thing I just want to mention is Way of the Weaver. It's a magic school that I run with my friend and collaborator, Murphy. And we do lots of different things like the Adult Witchy Summer Camp. We do that every year. We do it the last week of June. We'd love to have you or any of your viewers. And what's coming up right away, though, is our winter online module. So January through March every year, we kind of like rotate topics and teach some kind of like witchy skill set. This year, we are doing spells for the resistance. So it's a spellwork laboratory, but it's particularly focused on getting involved in activism on many different levels to kind of contribute to this sort of movement and energy in the world and to give you some tools to help guide you through all the mass chaos. And we are going to talk about specific spells and specific things you can do, so it's not just theory. Like, we're really going to give you some assignments to hit the ground running. So I'm really looking forward to that. Enrollment opens October 27th, so we're almost there, and you can find all the info on my website.
Awesome. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you so much. And everything that you mentioned, I will link in the caption below. So thank you,
Yeah,
Jamie.
you're so welcome. I really love your channel, and I've checked out your videos, and
Thank
they're
you.
wonderful and they're beautiful to look at.
Thank you. Thank you.
And it's always really nice to chat with someone else who works with some of the underworld energies. So yeah, so thanks everybody. Thanks for watching, and thank you so much, Serena, for inviting me.
If you enjoyed this episode and would like to help support my work, please like, comment, subscribe, share. All of this helps my channel grow and keeps the sacred work flowing. And as always, may your path be sacred, your shadow sovereign, and may you always bloom wildly. I'll see you next time. You guys want to see my orchid? You want an orchid update? I got a 6th bloom. She's beautiful. Yes, last time I did an orchid update, she only had 5, and now we have 6, and she's doing so well. I'm so excited. And this is really nerdy, but I do hope that she grows more blooms. However, Persephone ate 6 seeds in the underworld. At least that's the number that I'm choosing. Different people will say different things, but I say 6. So the 6 is number 6 is really important to me, and so just what a beautiful little surprise. So my orchid update for anyone who cares.